And again, if you purchased one of these books, you will see that it's not complete NIV all the way through. It is the NIV, but it's not the complete Bible. It's just portions, 31 chapters of the Bible broken down. And last week we talked about creation and Adam and Eve. And we're going to step into that for part 2 with Father Abraham. First off, though, I'm going to dismiss the kids for Children's Church. I almost forgot, Cassie, but I saw you guys sitting back there. Kids ages 4 through 4th grade are dismissed to go to a special service geared just for them. And hey, I've got one copy of the story left for $10. Anybody want it? Going? There's one right over there.
We signed up for one. Is that ours or is that?
It is now.
Okay.
Have your people talk to my people. So, we're going to look at chapter 2 of the story. And that deals with Father Abraham. And we were going to do Father Abraham and many sons, but I couldn't find a volunteer to lead us through that. So we'll just skip that portion of it, because I sure don't want to do it. But before I start, I want to give you a bit of discouraging news. We have been talking about bringing in this group from Texas called the Power Team, and plans are falling through. It doesn't look like we're going to be able to bring them in March. And I really don't want to get into a lot of the technical details about why, and it's not saying that we're never going to do that, but not in March. Now, let me just say, friends, there is a plan B. And I will tell you the plan B, but I'm not going to tell you today. Because all the details have not been worked out, but I promise as soon as I'm able to tell you, I will tell you. Plan B. Seems kind of scary to some of us to think about plan B. But you know what? That's just a way of life, isn't it? Last week we talked about creation, and again we talked about Genesis chapters 1 through 9, and we talked about Adam and Eve, and we talked about Cain and Abel, and we talked a little bit about Noah. And plan A was for Adam and Eve to live in this perfect environment with God. But man messed up. So God went to plan B. And man continued to do his thing, and God came up with a new plan, and that was to start over with Noah. But friends, it was the same story, but a different day. And man messed up again, and God had to come up with another plan B. So again, to remind you from last week, God's original vision was to come down, and He wanted to live in this perfect fellowship with us. And that's what the Garden of Eden was all about. And when Adam and Eve and Noah and his boys decided to follow their own agenda instead of God's agenda, they were breaking that direct God connection for all of us. And really, as I think about this, it would have made sense for God to go back to this perfect community that He had with the Trinity. Because that's what I would have done. I'd have said, I'm taking my ball and I'm going home. It's either my way or the highway. So play by my rules or I'm not going to play. But here's the deal. God is a lot smarter than me. And remember that we are His crowning achievement. And He's not about to abandon His goal of finding a way in order for Him to do life with us. So what He decided to do was to continue His grand vision of community with us and establish this nation, a special group of related, like-minded people intent on knowing God as much as He wanted to know them. And through this specially chosen nation, God would reveal Himself to everyone and offer a plan that would try to draw His people back into this special relationship with Him. I know my microphone cuts in and cuts out, doesn't it? We don't know why. I raise my hands, it goes on. I raise my hands, it goes on. So, plan B. What was God's plan B? How was God going to accomplish that? Again, human thinking would be much different than God's thinking. So God had to choose the perfect couple to start over with. Now think about Jeff's way of thinking. Okay? If this was going to be me, what I would do is I would probably look around our congregation for a young and healthy, happy couple. Like maybe Scott and CJ. Let's start with them. They're young, they love the Lord, they want a family, let's start with them to start over with. That's probably how Jeff would do it. But not God. So how is God going to do it? In your sermon notes, that's number 1. We need to start thinking like God. Okay, we need to start thinking like God. Isaiah 55:8 says this, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord." So God says, you know what? I'm not going to start with Scott and CJ. I'm going to start with Harry and Lorna. Lorna says, wait a minute. I don't like that plan, you know? Man would look at that and say, are you kidding? But God says, my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. Enter the story, Abraham and Sarah. You see, God wanted His divine fingerprints on the process from day one. So, it was He who chose an old childless couple to be the parents of this new nation that only He could envision. For you and I, we'd probably choose someone probably polar opposite. But God went with the 75-year-old Abraham and the 65-year-old Sarah. Now, the real kicker to this story is that not only were they advancing in age and well past the time that guys are reading James Dobson kind of stuff, you know, they were barren. They had tried to have kids for years and had failed. Sarah had these infertility issues. And the lineage of Abraham was destined to end when they died. And you see, that was our human thinking. But it wasn't God's. So if you have your Bible, go to Genesis chapter 12. I'm going to show you how this happened. Genesis chapter 12. We'll read the story about Abraham and Sarah. Starting in verse 1. The Lord has said to Abram, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So Abram left, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarah and nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. So, God tells Abraham, I want you to leave your comfy gated retirement community, and I want you to take off on this new adventure. So he says, make sure to pack up your Geritol and get your polygrip. You know, we got a job to do. And I'm quite certain that Abraham had no comprehension as to what God was up to. And I'm sure he didn't think for a second that God could use him and his offspring to bring God's children back to the garden. But I love it because the Bible simply says that Abraham obeyed and he went. Now the writer of Hebrews, whoever that is, in chapter 11 kind of gives us a clue that maybe what Abraham was thinking. It says, by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. And this leads us to number 2 in your sermon notes, okay? Battle Lake Alliance Church. Be willing to be stretched from your comfort zone. Be willing to be stretched from your comfort zone. Wait until Greg comes up a little bit later and gives you our report for next year. That's why I'm wearing Hunter Orange, so I don't get the bullets. You get Greg. Be willing to be stretched. Okay? Be willing to be stretched. Abraham and Sarah had no idea what God was up to. But they were obedient. They were being stretched far beyond what most senior citizens would consider to be comfortable. Now, if you're not a Christ follower and you're here today, please allow me to help you understand one thing about Christianity. Okay? Just because you accept Jesus into your life, it doesn't mean that you're going to go the rest of your life problem-free. Now, it does mean you're going to go to heaven, and there's a lot of cool benefits from having a relationship with Jesus. But this idea of never having a problem again ain't going to happen. Not so much. Abraham and Sarah are being stretched like a rubber band, but they're actively following God's plans for their lives. But in the middle of that, they have problems. Okay, remember back Genesis chapter 12, God was going to make Abraham into a great nation. But in order to have a great nation, you got to have some people. So Abraham and Sarah start going in the direction they're supposed to go, but nothing happens. And days, they turn into weeks. And weeks turn into months. And before you know it, those months turn into years. 10 years goes by and still no children. So if you're keeping track, Abraham is now 85 years old and Sarah is now 75 years old. So Sarah decides to take matters in her own hands. And she starts to figure that James kind of stuff, that faith without works is dead, something like that. And what Sarah did was she concocted a plan where her and her faithful husband would have, something else go on. That her husband Abraham would have an extramarital relation with her servant Hagar. And Abraham, being like an obedient husband, says, okay, honey, if that's what you want, that's what we'll do, if it makes you happy. And Hagar has a healthy little boy, and they name him Ishmael. Now, the story continues with a very typical outcome. Hagar has a baby, and Sarah doesn't have a baby. Sarah's even more upset. So Hagar takes off running from Sarah in the fear that she's going to die, that Sarah's going to kill her. And that's where she meets God. And we're introduced to another very important name for God. And that's one of the things we're going to do through the stories, is learn all these different names from God. So if you've got your Bibles, keep going to Genesis chapter 16. I want you to see this very important name for God. Genesis 16:11. This is kind of the theme of the day and where I'm going. The angel of the Lord also said to her, verse 11, you are now with child, and you will have a son. You shall name him Ishmael. For the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he will live in hostility towards all his brothers. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. That is why this well is called Bir Lahai Roi. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave him the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. Now I love this name for God, El Roi. El Roi is translated to say, the Lord who sees. I thought a lot about that this week. There's so many times that we go through things in life, whether it's tough relationships, whether it's poor health, whether it's job issues, whatever. And we get this feeling in the pit of our stomach like no one knows what I'm going through. No one understands me. No one's walked this road before. But you see, God saw the pain that Hagar was going through. He met her where she was, and He ministered to her. If you get nothing else I say today, you got to get this. You got to get this. God sees your pain as well. He sees your pain as well. Whatever the pain might be, God sees it. And He wants to minister to you. I don't want to go into too many details, but I was talking to a gal from one of my former churches this week. This girl has gone through a lot. Very tough time over the past 10 years. And we talked briefly about her issues, and she offered to help me by offering me to be able to look into her life and glean some answers from her life for someone who's walking down the same path as her. Lots of pain. It was very hard for her to share it. Very, very hard. And as painful as this was for her, she was willing to allow herself to be stretched out of her comfort zone to help somebody else. You see, this is such a cool example of Hebrews chapter 12 because it tells us to endure hardships as discipline. God allows us, like that rubber band, He allows us to be stretched because later, if we're willing, God can take those challenges that we go through and use them to minister to somebody else. I mean, think about it this way. Who better to minister to someone who's lost a child than someone who's lost a child? Who better to minister to somebody battling cancer than someone who has already battled cancer? And it's not that you have to have the same challenges in order to minister, but what I found in almost 20 years of ministry is that the power of empathy is unbelievable. It means so much to know that someone else has walked in your shoes.